This week on the show, we are talking all things air and why a travel advisor should, in fact, be charging air. And so, without further ado, I am so excited to welcome Lary, the airfare expert, to the show. Hello.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to be here.
I am so glad this worked out. I was about to reach out, and then you reached out, and I'm like, we've got to talk air because it's one of those things that it never occurred to me not to sell air. And yet I hear from travel advisors all the time, oh, I don't sell air. I send them away when it comes time to do air. And I die a little inside. The customer service side of me just dies a little. So we're going to talk air and we're going to talk about how to do it. We're going to answer some questions that came from the Facebook group. If you're not a part of the group, go check the show notes. We're going to make sure it's all linked up in there. But let's just jump right in. So you are an airfare expert. So what does that mean?
I guess at the base, it means that, I've worked for an airline for 9 years in pricing and revenue management. So I've learned the ins and outs of air. And, so that made me an expert in that sense. And that's a fairly easy thing for me to build trust with clients just based on that. So that's the way in to be an expert. But there's so much more to air than anything else. And, to me, it's an experience. And you don't need to be an expert. There's steps you can do to play a role in your clients when they travel with air. And it could be as easy as you want it to be.
I love that. So now a lot of times travel advisors say, I don't want to, or it's too complicated. So if a travel advisor has never sold air for their clients, what do you usually suggest as a way to get started with that?
Just a reminder of, first of all, everybody knows so much more than they think they do already. If you've traveled, if you've gotten on a plane, you just forgot how easy it is. And if you just think about the last time you were on a plane with alone with your family, and document all the steps, all the things you did to take care of your own flight. And you're going to have a list of 3, 5, 7 things that you did. And you're going to look at it and you'll be like, Larry, that's way too easy. Like, I can't charge for that. Yeah, you can. It's that simple. Because the reality is, though clients usually come to us for air, and it's never been easier because now there's so much in the news about fear. And there's fear of a plane crash. There's fear of flying on the Boeing Max 8. There's fear of cancellation because we heard about a snowstorm in Chicago that had 2,000 flight cancellation. And there's COVID, right? Everything that happened with COVID about booking, getting refunds, and people booking on their own and trying to call the airline and waiting on hold forever. So these are all fears that your clients will come to you for help. Now, once you help them, you'll notice that what they really worry about is not about cancellation. I mean, you may, and it's a legitimate fear. I'm not going to dismiss it. But what they worry about is, how much time do I have to be at the airport before the flight? Which terminal do I go check into? How much luggage do I need to bring? They're the most basic questions. And all of you know all these answers. And because it's easy to answer and because it's second nature to us to do that, it by no means means that there's zero value into it.
Absolutely.
And that's where I would start. And all I would ever ask anybody that wants to get into air is just play a role in your client's trip when they fly. You can start small, you can be accustomed, get familiar with 2 or 3 things you do. And then as you get more familiar, you can add more stuff and develop your air offer. But just know what your client has gone through from their house to the airport, to the plane, to your hotel, or to transfer. And then if they get there in a bad mood and first thing they notice when they get into the room is that the champagne bottle's not there, or there's a hair in the tub or something, at least you'll know why. And you won't be like, oh my God, did I forget something? Right? So just understand the journey to this experience you've created for them and make the air part of the experience so that you can make a home-to-home experience for all your clients.
I love that. You're right. It is. It is part of the experience. Years ago, I took out a group for the Farms, Foods, and Factories tour of Italy that we built. And it was interesting to see how many of them, the tipping scale was that their air was going to be part of it, but more importantly, that I would be on the plane with them. So they didn't have to worry about being lost in airports. I think because this is something that travel advisors do day in, day out, and they travel so frequently that they lose sight of the fact that for a lot of clients, it's not the expense, it's not the distance, it's not all these other things. It is the, oh my goodness, I watched the news last night and airports are terrifying, so I can't fly. And so they're losing the sale for reasons they don't actually realize is why they're losing the sale. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. It's fear over fear. And if you match fear with fear, you know, if you fear the same thing your client fears, it's not going to work.
Mhm.
And I'll put it a step further. I mean, you may get into helping with air, and there is going to be some fear. I'm not going to debate that. But the reality is most of us get into air in a reactive mode, thinking that we need to save the world, that it's our fault if the flight gets canceled and we need to charter a plane and build a new one to get them to where they need to go. But the reality is, like, it has nothing to do with you first of all. And if you could do all the little things that your clients want you to do, right? You track their flight, tell them the flight's on time. Like when you communicate and you have touch points with them where there's no crisis, right? So I call those low hanging fruits. All the things you could do that takes low effort, low time. That on the other end, on the client's perspective, massive amount of value. I mean, telling a client that if they connect in Toronto, they have to change from terminal 3 to 1 may seem obvious to you, may seem nothing. But just by telling them, all of a sudden they go, oh, good, I'm glad I know that. And then if you push a little further and you send them a map of how they get from 3 to 1, you got them forever.
Right?
It's the little things.
Yeah.
So that if that night a flight gets canceled, you already have that relationship. You've already established some of that trust. You've already displayed some of your expertise. You're already a little more confident. So then if something happened, I guarantee you, if something like a cancellation or misconnections or any of the big things that keeps you up at night happens, you're a lot less likely to, you'll be much better at handling those situations than if you didn't do anything else on top of that. So it's the little things that lead to the bigger things being so much easier.
For sure. And I actually think that also leads into what I perceive as a very big misconception in the industry, that if I don't book their air, it's not my fault if anything goes wrong, which it's not your fault, but it's also not your fault if you book the air. But here's the scoop. If your client misconnects in Toronto, misconnects in Salt Lake, wherever it is, they misconnect, which means that now they're waiting on it. And depending on the time of year, it's not that necessarily the next flight, it's the next available flight. And in peak season, that might be a couple of days down the road. You still need to be coordinating their hotels on the other end. You need to be coordinating all of these other things. So it's not that you're like, I didn't book their air, I don't have to do anything else. You're still in the thick of it. So in which case, I personally, from a customer service perspective, always booked their air so that I was on top of it, because then that way, if there was a cancellation of the flight or something of that nature, I made sure I got notified so I could start working on what some of the alternatives were. And so that kind of brings us to a question that came in earlier, is that if something happens on the ground, or a misconnect or something, Melanie was asking, do they talk to the counter? Do you call it in? Like, where does that come from? Like, what is the best plan of action with that?
It depends if you booked it or if you didn't, but I'll guarantee you either way, they will call you.
For sure.
So you might as well be ready for it, and you might as well have collected a fee for it, and you might as well have done a little bit of work beforehand. The best thing to do, if you, let's say you're someone who just booked directly with the airline or you booked through a tour operator or something like that, once you get within 24 hours of a flight, everything is airport control. So very little can agents on the phone do for you, okay? I should say when you're at the airport and they're in transit, very little a phone agent can do for you if it's before they can. But the client can always reach out to anyone. Even if you book to a tour operator and it's within 24 hours that something happened and they're at the airport, they can go to the counter, and the counter's not going to be like, sorry, you need to call Travel Brand or you need to call Expedia. Okay. They'll be able to help. First thing you should do is you should always have the client to have the app on their phone with their booking into it for them. And if you want to help, have it in yours too. Have it on your phone. Have the app. You don't even need to be logged in. You don't even need to have a profile. You can add to any airline app, any reservation number, as long as you have the reservation number and the last name. Super easy. You'll get a ton of notifications. You won't even know what to do with them. And if you want to look like a superstar, they're going to give you all the gold you need in order to help your clients. And then you'll be in a more anticipative mode versus reacting, right? So you can kind of see a trend coming, right? I mean, most of us have enough experience to kind of see when things are starting to slide. So the app is the best place that you can react to. Most apps are getting really good at helping clients in terms of when it's irregular operation. They're not quite all there yet, but most of them will allow you to rebook you on the next flight. And the faster you do it, to your point, you want to get the next seat before the next person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could do that on the app. If for some reason it doesn't happen, whoever you have closest to you. If you're at the gate, go see the gate agent. They can do it. Most airports will have a service center, right? Depending on the airline you fly on. If there's no line, find a place where there's no line. Don't line up behind everybody else. If you have access to the lounge agent can do it. If you have to exit security and go to the check-in counter, they also can help you. I guarantee most people won't go there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while you're lined up, if you have to, get on the call. And whoever picks up, the person and the counter person or the call center agent, and be on your app. Like, these are all the things that you can do. And I will say too that most of the time now, I mean, I use the GDS, and often they will reaccommodate the client on a next flight faster than I can. And I was like, oh, I know, I just lost control of it. And so the airlines are getting a lot faster to rebook clients on the next flights when they're available. The issue, again, to your point, is if it's Christmas and there are no flights available, then you'll get a message. Your flight's canceled, your flight's delayed, you missed your connection. We couldn't find you a new flight. Good luck.
Yep.
And then what? Right? So then the clients are starting to get hyperventilative and they don't know what to do. And then they'll call you, and then, you can help in just finding what the next best flight is. You can't make seats. You can't make it. If you just give them what the next available flight is that you see, you can use Google Flights, you can use the airline website, just find a way to find what the next flight that will get you to where they need to go. Give them flight numbers, give them the dates, and then when they get to talk to someone, all they have to do is like, here's what I got. Can you put me on this flight?
Yep.
Because that agent has been talking to a lot of people trying to reaccommodate. So if you're the person that shows up at the counter and says, I want this flight, and be like, oh, thank God, thank you. I don't have to search the earth for this. And then if they have it, they'll give you anything. When things go sideways, airlines will give you any seat as long as there's availability, and sometimes even upper class, but most of the time they'll keep you in the same cabin class.
Yeah.
So
and the more you travel, the more likely you are to encounter a delay, cancellation, whatever. I flew to San Antonio. Chase a squirrel for a second. We were booked on a flight to San Antonio for my mom's birthday. I think it was her 60th birthday. And there had been a major snowstorm up in Grand Prairie, which is where my sister is. So she was flying to Calgary. We were supposed to meet up. There was a whole schmoz because, we had to put her on a different flight. Like my phone was going by 4:00 in the morning to say that this had happened. We get to Calgary, we held the plane. And so that just meant we walked really slowly so that she could come running down through the airport. She made the flight. They got her on there. We got to Denver. We went to scan her in, her boarding pass. And here somewheres along the line back in Grand Prairie, they had canceled her flight. So she didn't have a ticket onwards. And I just had this feeling, and I was traveling with just carry-on. So I ended up staying back. I did tell the gate agent, you need to go tell the lady in the front seat that we're not getting on. And he said no. So I called him a chicken. So I called my other sister. I'm like, hey, so we're not going to make this flight. Talk to you later. Bye. Hung up. And so, I was on my phone. We ended up going out to the check-in counter to go find somebody. So we were on the phone. We were checking things online. We were like doing all the things in multiple different ways so that when we did finally get somebody, because of course it was Air Canada inside Denver, that was another story, but to try and get this flight all sorted out, we knew what we wanted, we knew what we needed, and we knew how to ask for it. And so we were able to get on to the next flight and do these sorts of things. But I will say, my sister actually said, had you not got off the flight with me, she goes, I just would have booked a flight home, because she goes, this was too much. And I'm like, but it's not that big of a deal. Like, it really was no different than just like if you were to book a flight home, it would have been the same amount of stress. But
Yeah.
as a consumer, she got so wrapped up in this is too much. And it has the potential to ruin things for your clients. So, from the customer service perspective, yes, as a quote unquote travel advisor in that moment, I couldn't take over the file. I couldn't do things, but I could keep my client calm. I have had
Mm.
many clients over the years that call me just in like a sheer panic because they're maybe newer to travel, newer this. And so I will look up flights to tell them to ask the gate agent for things to let, like when the gate agent, I remember one client in particular, she said they're going to put us on different flights. And I said, you can tell them no, you don't have to accept that.
Mhm.
And she goes, well, how do I do that? And I said, repeat after me. She goes, okay, no, thank you. She's like, what? I said, just say no, thank you. That's all. I said, and instead, if you take a slightly longer delay, you can get on this flight, you can stay together. And she's like, but what do we do? I said, well, in this airport, this is where there is a lounge you can pay for. And we're just simply going to put it through on your insurance. There's
Yep.
ways of doing that. And so through it all, she was like, oh my God, you made this so easy. And she goes, I would have been completely lost. That's all your
Oh,
clients are asking for, is for you to keep them from being completely lost. And whether I book the air or not, that's the service I would have given them because I could not take over the file. It was already under, as you said, under airport control. So
yeah.
my job then was, how do I make the best out of the situation that it is? Give them alternatives. Give them a place to go and decompress. Because she said to me, she goes, but the lounge is going to be like $50 or $100 or whatever. I'm like, yes, but your sanity is worth more. They will have food in there. You don't have to listen to every airport announcement. They have big, comfy recliners. It's worth it. And so then she started, and I kind of chuckle because half an hour later is a photo of her and her husband inside the lounge thanking me on social media, saying how much she appreciated that. And you can't pay for that kind of marketing because then everybody else was like, oh my goodness, I always get trapped. Like, how did you know about this? And she said, because I
Yeah.
hired a professional.
Yep. Oh, I have so many thoughts about that. Hopefully, I get through them fast. First of all, when everybody's been told, sometimes people just need to talk and they just need to be heard.
That's
You
so
need to fix the
true.
problem. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
your clients are often the same way. When you can't do anything, you the best you could do is just be there. Just be there for them, first of all. Now, most people underestimate, and we're in the travel business, so we travel more
Yes.
than most people.
Yes.
Now, if you think about the flow of getting ready for travel, you have someone who goes through their week. Let's say they're leaving on Friday. They go through the work week, and then Wednesday goes like, okay, I'm leaving on Friday, and then the stress starts to pile up a little bit. And on
Yep.
Thursday, like a little more, and then on Friday they go, okay, babysitter for the kids, dog in the kennel, out of office reply. Did I pass on this project? And then the stress goes up, and then they go to
Yep.
the airport, and then it just skyrockets.
Right.
And then you get on
That
the
is
plane, and
that is
again,
why there is restaurants serving liquor at 8 o'clock in the morning inside of airports.
yeah. And so if you can play a part to keep that stress
Yeah.
down, they will be in a much better headspace
Yeah.
to enjoy the rest of the trip that you've worked so hard to curate the best possible product for them.
Yeah.
A step further, like if it was me, like if it was me handling that flight, you know what I would have done? I probably would have tracked the flight the night before. I would have looked at the weather the night before. If it was a major snowstorm, sometimes it's a fluke thing and you just need to react.
Yep.
Sometimes there's the only ways to
Yep.
react, right? But oftentimes when you can anticipate, airlines, like I worked for WestJet for 9 years and I work in pricing and revenue management, and airlines are so much better now at anticipating. Trust me, if there's a
Mhm.
snowstorm in Calgary, they don't want you there.
Mm-mm.
They don't want their planes to be there. They don't want the people to be there. It used to be wait and see. Then
Yep.
everybody piles up, all the planes land, and they go, shit, we can't take off. Nowadays, more often than not, a day or two before, there'll be an alert that'll be sent by the airline. And if it's not your airline, it's going to be the next airline. One airline is going to send an alert based on the airport your client's flying out of. And they're going to say, we're anticipating weather that day. Here's a waiver code. Here's a way you can reprotect. You can change your flight, no fees. sometimes no difference in fare, whatever the rules are, you can move your clients. So if you have the possibility to move your clients out of this potential jam, you can. It's the
Mhm.
easiest way to deal with it. Now, if they can't leave early, if they can't, you can just sometimes reroute them, right? If the problem is in Denver, you can connect them to San Francisco, avoid it, right? So there's a lot of things, little things you could do. And I mean, you would do it if you were to drive,
Mhm.
a long distance. Like likely you would look, is it going to snow on the road? Like what am I going to be my condition? It's the same thing when somebody flies. Like you could look at what the weather is going to be like at their departure city, the connecting city, and the arrival city to see if there's potential for hurdles. And if there is, and you can do something about it, then make the plans now when it's calm. You have hours to figure out what the next move is. You're not under the gun. Nobody's calling you, flights cancel, help me now. And you just buy yourself some time. And so, I mean, ultimately, it's just about managing the stress and whatever you can do to lower it. Um, that's all that matters. And then you end up with, kudos like you did from your client. And it's as simple
Right.
as that.
And it's that matter of the client also feeling like you're in it as a collaboration, that you are in it with them all the way through. The best part of offering that level of service, you get to charge for it
Oh,
because that's where the gravy is. And yes, things are going to go sideways, but heads up, if it's going to go sideways, it's going to go sideways whether you got compensated for it or not. So in which
mhm.
case, decide the level of service that you want to offer to your clients and then charge accordingly, because you're absolutely right. I had friends, they had booked on their own to go to Hawaii a couple of years ago when there was that, I guess it would have been last year, that mass hard freeze. So Alberta wasn't flying in or out for days, and they got trapped. It was the end of the Christmas break, got trapped in Vancouver, I think, for 5 days. And
Mhm.
so she had messaged me and she's like, what the actual? Like, why can't we get out of here? I'm like, because nobody's working the airports in Alberta. Like, nothing's flying. And so, I was sending her like, well, go ask about this, go ask about this, like try this. And then we ended up getting her out. Like it was the last 3 seats. And I did it because it was a friend and because I technically don't sell. But otherwise, that is like, it was just, well, try this, try that. Like she was another business owner in town. And I'm like, dude, you got to get back to get your business going. And that's just it. Like we have like, your clients are business owners. Your clients have kids that need to be where they are. Your clients need to get back for their jobs. And so, yes, there's a delay, but it's not the delay that's stressing them. It is all of these other repercussions of what those delays might be. And so I think it's really important to remember that it's not just when they're freaking out, it's not that they're stuck at an airport. It is what being stuck in an airport actually means.
Mhm.
And so they just need somebody. And so if they can also, I find if I can walk my clients off a ledge, anytime I could like talk them off the ledge, then they would be like, "Oh, well, suddenly the counter person's much more helpful." I'm like, "Yeah, because you're not screaming at them." So when you can arm them with that little bit of information to be able to say, "Okay, so you're going to ask for this or this. Like I've already checked out. There's still this many seats left. Do this, ask for that. Make sure you say please and thank you and be kind because they're being screamed at by everybody." And then the amount of clients I would have afterwards are like, "Man, people in airports are nasty." I'm like, "Yeah, you should have heard what you sound like when you called me." Like, so, but it's just that moment. So, back to the questions here. So this one I know comes up a lot. So Elisa wanted to know, what's the difference between a bulk fare and a published fare?
So bulk is the first level, published fare is the third level, and there's in the middle, there's a net fare as well, if you want to be technical. Bulk, they're not as popular anymore, and you'll find a lot of them sits on the Pacific coast over to Asia. It's a big thing in these markets to have bulk fares, meaning that the airline will give a ridiculous low price to specific agencies for the most part. They can also be online agencies, and it's up to them to mark up that fare to whatever they feel they can sell for. And if they want to mark it up to the published fare, then it's the same. And if they wanted to cut the published fares, they can. The reason why it's not popular is because most airlines won't accept to be undercut on the published fare anymore. So
Okay.
often the requirement is the bulk It's your commission. Like it almost works like a net fare. You've got to mark it up to at least the publish. You can mark it over if you want to, but you can't undercut us. But the Asian market is a bit different because there's a lot of volume, there's a lot of flights, and they just need to move some of those seats, especially in trial season. And the pitfall about a bulk fare is if you have clients that have status, but that care about status with an airline, a bulk fare will give your client miles accumulated. But status nowadays, to gain an airline status, there's two components, and there's miles and dollar spent. So you need to fly 100,000 miles to be super elite, and you need to spend $20,000 every year. Now, if you get a bulk fare to the Philippines, you will get the miles, but you won't get the dollars because the airline doesn't know what it was sold for. So it can't give you any of that. So if you have a business client, it's good to be like, especially in business class, it's like, oh, I can save you $2,000. And then they come back and at the end of the year and they're $2,000 short on making super elite, and they go, what happened? What happened to this flight? And it's like, that was a bulk fare, right? So there's always a flip side to saving money. There's always a flip side, and you just need to make sure the clients are aware of it. And sometimes the people that sell you those bulk fares aren't as transparent as giving you that information, unfortunately.
The other thing that I know over the years I ran into with a bulk fare is that then it has to be that very specific class of fare if they have to change their ticket. Because I would have clients, whether it was, I think of one client in particular, he had a lot of foreign workers from the Philippines. And so every year he would send them back on rotation so that they could go home. Like that was part of their benefits package. And at first we were doing bulk fares because the pricing was phenomenal. And then his guys started changing. His guys would start saying, well, we're going to stay this longer. Can we stay another 2 weeks? Can we stay another 3 weeks? Well, when we booked that bulk fare 6, 7, 8 months out to try and change it once they're already there, we could only book, say it was the G class affair or the F class affair or whatever it was. We could only book that, and it wasn't available again for like another 4 or 5 months. So we weren't able to do it. So in order to do it, they would either have to buy a one-way ticket or we just simply couldn't change it. And so that's something to keep in mind is those tickets become very difficult to change, or at least that's been my experience on it.
That makes a lot of sense, though. I've never encountered that, but it makes sense from an airline's perspective. If the lower the fare, they remove flexibility from it. I mean, we've all dealt with basic fare now, right? And that's the big selling point is like, yeah, you can have a cheaper fare, but we'll remove any flexibility you'll ever have. Same as if you book a Latitude or like a Y class in economy, refundable, change, no change fee, no difference in fare. It's already the highest fare. You can just change at will, but you pay for it. You pay for the flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jessica was asking, so where should you book? And this one I hear a lot. Like, do you book directly with the airline? Do you book it with another tour operator or air consolidator? What's the best way? And I'm going to say, for, and I don't know if the answer changes based on if you're Canadian or if you're American or from another country. What are your thoughts on that?
The main difference is I'm assuming like the best thing would be to book direct, just like with everything. Now, if you book direct on the consumer website, you may be Larry and you're booking for Joanne, but as far as the airline's concerned, there's no Larry. There's only a traveler whose name is Joanne. So if you call to make any changes and I call with the man boys and it's a female name, they'll be like, sorry, no access to this file, right? Yeah. Now, if you book direct and you have a travel agent portal where your agency is on record to have made the booking, then you can act on behalf of your client. So that's the only difference in between booking direct is one will give you full access, the other one won't give you as much access. So if you're in a bind to help your client, then you may be limited in what you can do. Having said that, if you book with a tour operator or a wholesaler or anything, and these guys have a 24-hour service desk, if it's a massive weather storm, I guarantee you reach out to them way faster than you'll reach out to the airline, right? So I guess it depends on the business you run and the level of access and control you want over it. I would say the easiest thing is just book direct with the airline and just get their help if you need to, or get the client to go get help if they need to. But then if you're after making commission, or if you're after getting a little more access, a little more control over the booking, then you may want to route through like a wholesaler tour operator, as long as they have a contact center that's open 24/7 that you can access on the weekend. and they will book on the GDS, so they will be able to make changes without
Mhm.
calling the airline. And if you book direct, you're going to have to be on the hold with the call center of the airline. So perhaps they can get things done a little faster. So it all depends. I guess it depends on the business model. It depends on the level of control you want, the level of support you want to offer your client, and how fast you need to help them. Um, and that's the commitment you make with air, right? For example,
Mhm.
our business is 100% air, right? We charge a tremendous amount of money to do air. We need to be fast. We
Yep.
need to make our own booking. We need to issue our own ticket. We need the GDS in order to provide that level of service that we promise. And that's why we do it. Now, if you just want to play a role and help along and have some control, you can book directly with the airline. You don't have as much access, but the demand on you is not as much either from the client's point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. And so then that also then does bring in, because travel advisors are like, there's no commission to be made on airfare. So, and I just heard you say that the commission word, and of course, I've had my own experience, but what do you say when travel advisors are like, but I've heard there's no commission to be made on air?
Oh my God, when I started to do air, like I've been in business for 10 years now, and I started 2.5 years in, I think, or maybe 2 years. Yeah, 2.5 years in. I was like, Safari, no. Cruises, what? I don't like that. The only thing I care about is air. So, and funny enough, my business name was always Airfare Consultant, right? So clearly, intuitively, I
Yep.
knew that's what I
Yep.
wanted to do. But then I fell in that. I wouldn't say it's a trap, because everybody gets that's the beginning point. You start to do everything for everyone, and at some point, you focus on what you really want to do. And everybody told me, "What, you're going to do air? Like, there's no commission to be made." I was like, "I don't care." Because another thing I did when I started the business is, first of all, I transitioned from working at an airline called WestJet in Canada. I worked for Flight Center for 13 months in Calgary as a full-fledged retail travel agent with like a suit and a bow tie. And that's when I realized that I was kind of going in the right direction, but I was in the wrong lane. Like, I really wanted to charge fees. I didn't like this whole markup thing.
Hmm.
And it was always important when I started my business. It's like, my invoice is always going to have all the travel component, and that last line is going to be airfare consultant. Here is the fee. That was
Yep.
a non-negotiable. And I've had iteration of how I charge fees, but that was always a thing I really wanted to do. And I was like, I'm going to charge fees. I don't really care. That's how I'm going to make money. And to this day, we have 80% of our revenue that comes from fees. And the 15% is because we book mostly business class ticket,
Yep.
and we make some decent amount of money. And to give you an example, yesterday, actually, we booked a $10,000 flight from Vancouver to Brisbane, Australia. We charged $700 for our fee, and then we had $1,000 commission.
Nice.
So, I mean,
Yep.
that's pretty sweet for. I mean, I would say for us, it's very little work, because ultimately, if you do things long enough on a long enough time horizon,
Yep.
it will take you less time, and it doesn't mean you should charge less money for it. Back to the point of, it takes no time, therefore I don't charge anything, which
Yep.
is, it doesn't add up in the long term. So there is money to be made, not on commission. There is money to be made on helping people. It's not about the booking. It's what you do to help your clients travel. How easy can you make this? How stress-free, how seamless can you make travel for them? And once you get into that kind of pricing, it's so intangible that you could just charge anything. Nobody has a frame of reference for what peace of mind costs.
Yep.
Nobody has a frame of reference for what a great experience costs, right? So then you
Yep.
become like your own little market of one. And then you compare yourself to now other professional outside of your industry, right? The gardener, like the au pair, the lawyer, the hairdresser, all these other professionals that your clients are accustomed to pay money to. And then you realize all of a sudden that, you're still talking in hundreds and your clients are talking in thousands.
Yep.
And you're like, ooh, leaving some money on the table here.
Yep.
Anyway, I didn't want to get into fees for commission, but I think it was.
You know what? But the thing is that's the number one reason I hear why travel advisors don't touch airfare. And I was chatting with somebody the other day who said all of her clients, they are business class and private jet type clients, but she doesn't do air. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're leaving on the table. And if that's the type of client they are,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you want a service from beginning to end? Because it's just a huge sort of thing. So This one is a question that came in from Marisol, and I think we might be missing a little bit here, but I do know that it kind of highlights. So it says, I have a family that goes to the Philippines frequently and gets booked elsewhere for much less expensive, like $1,300 round trip in December versus 2,000 on the published fares. They're told it's a group rate. So we kind of touched a little bit on bulk fares earlier, and that would be my guess, is that that's what they're working with. But would that, generally speaking, explain why one agency can get such a different price than what other ones can?
It can, yeah. I mean, it doesn't explain. I mean, I don't know the percentage difference. I mean, $700 on 2,000, like that's a pretty high commission. So that's just not a commission thing. But it is possible. I mean, the other thing I would say is that it's entirely possible that it's not the exact itinerary. I mean, that
Mhm.
happens so often.
Yeah.
You get people that go, "Oh, I can get there for this much," and you look at it and you're like, "That's not the same thing." Like you have
Yeah.
an extra connection. It's a different day. It's a different airline, and sometimes it's just like a code share versus the original carrier. But that's a
Yeah.
different story. But it could be as simple as that. I mean, it wouldn't if they said it's a group fare. I think they mean like they have bulk fares, like they have 40 seats, and you're part of that 40 seats on that plane at that price, and they tell you you're part of a group, but it's you four versus the next four versus the next four, and altogether you make a group. That would be my assumption. But yeah, that would be a bulk fare. Again, it would fit into like the Asia Pacific route
Yeah.
that you normally see.
And again, it's also double checking. And so it's not, so one of the things that I would caution is that when you see those big things is not to go on the defense.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes it's triggering because it's like, oh, I did all this work, now I'm going to lose it. I know that from Alberta to the Philippines with Philippine Air, just using that as an example, there can be upwards of $1,000 or more price difference. But the difference is whether the flight goes through Vancouver or through Los Angeles. And
Mhm.
there's a whole different set of visas and other such required for, depending on the passport, for traveling through the US versus traveling straight out of Canada. And so, and yes, I am using a Canadian example, but the same is true no matter where you are in the country or in the world, whatever country, depending on what type of passports your clients are holding. So, yes, they may have found something less expensive, but it also might trigger a different set of requirements, a different set of visas, a different set of all of these other sorts of things. They may have to send their passports off somewheres to get a visa at, like, there's a bunch of things that can be added into that. And so it's important to make sure that it's not just, oh my goodness, but then there's this or that, but actually a conversation about, okay, well, let's have a look at what it is that you're looking at. And in the event that all is looking kosher, then that's up to them to decide if they're comfortable booking with where they're looking at. I know I got a phone call from a friend of mine the other day, and they said, the Canadian, Air Canada WestJet, because they had to go to another province for a funeral. The flights, I wanna say, because again, it was last minute, I wanna say it was, like, over $1,000 or something. Oh, no, it was, like, 1,500, and he called me, and he's like, "Hey, so my cousin found this, and it's, like, $250 to go next week," and I'm like, "I don't trust that." Like, there is just no way, and so I got looking, and here it's all these UK websites, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't be putting my credit card down on that. You do you, but I wouldn't be putting my credit card down on that. But then I started doing a little digging, and yeah, there's a bunch of websites from other countries that are giving some insane prices. And I'm going to say not everything is usually going to look the way, it's not always as good as it looks. So,
And I would say if somebody brings you a price difference, and I think that's the biggest thing to try to steer your clients away from. I mean, I know if I go buy olive oil, I have no idea what the difference is. The only thing I know is a star rating, and it goes up to 7, right? And I'm going to go, okay, 3, 4, maybe I'll stick to 5 to 6, right? Oh, maybe I'm not going to pay 7. And then it's all like this one variable that you put your frame around. And so if somebody says, I found a price for cheaper, I'd be like, ooh, let me try to find. Remember, there's always a shadow side to saving money, always. And I'll be like, ooh, let's just put some context around there. Let's just highlight what they're not going to get or what they potentially could get by buying this cheaper fare. And often you'll find like somebody's not giving you the exact itinerary. And if it's not identical, it's possible that it's less.
Yeah.
So it's finding that, and that's the whole game of air. It's always to provide the context. And the best thing that you could do is to anchor any pricing to what your client tells you they want all the time. Don't anchor against the cheapest possible flight you can find on the internet, because you're going to find it really hard to get them a flight that works for them. Right. And that's why, and I'm sure we're going to get into how we look for flights, but we can, expand there. But there's always a reason, and it often doesn't have to do with you. And sometimes if it does, you go like, oh, I didn't see that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying I missed it.
Yep.
Right. Or you're right. You validate their, oh my God. And then you go like, oh my God, I'm good. And sometimes that's just how it goes. I mean, you don't have to be perfect all the time. Nobody's batting 1,000 when it comes to air. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that does actually bring up a question that had come in that was about pricing, because they said that they quote them, best time of day, best this, most direct, most everything. And then the clients are like, but it's too expensive. And so from my side of the coaching part of it is that I would say that there's probably more questions that need to take place in the consultation part of it, because if they are more price focused, keeping in mind price is never the issue unless it's the issue, in which case it's the only issue, but it's never the issue. So it's making sure that they understand that if you want to go midday, so you don't have to get up at 2:00 in the morning to get to the airport, and you don't want to get there so that you land after midnight, so you miss the whole first day, but you still got to pay for your hotel. Guess what? Everybody else wants that prime time too. So those ones are always going to sell first. Direct are always going to fill up first. All of these other sorts of things are always going to be everybody else's. And our entire industry, whether we're talking air, cruise lines, hotels, whatever, is coming back to grade 3 supply and demand math. Like when they talked about supply and demand, travel is an entire supply and demand industry. So therefore, if you want to tap into the supply of the highest demand products, you're going to pay a premium for that. And so it would be having those questions outside of the actual proposal. Okay, so are you willing to which one are you willing to compromise on?
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to take a connecting flight for a better price? Or are we willing to pay the extra to have direct, to have the better time of day? Which one is it? But now from your perspective, on the actual looking for it, what would you say about pricing?
So that's the job I used to have, right? And by default, we'll always make the 6 a.m. cheaper and the 12:30 midnight arrival cheaper. And then you pyramid in the middle, right? So all things equal, no seats sold on the plane, it's entirely possible that the 6, 7 a.m. are cheaper, 8, 9, 10, 11, because that's more business morning or more expensive to start with, right? And then there's more demand for those flights and people are willing to pay more money, so they're not as price sensitive. So they book faster. So then the gap in between the morning and the peak times, then the gaps get much bigger. But I want to touch on something on the question I forgot to say before. Actually, it's probably the main reason why your client brings you a price and you don't see the same price.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time when we look at stuff through a portal from a tour operator or the consumer website, it's direct inventory. The price you see is the price you're going to book 99.9% of the time. Now, the way the online travel agency works is, it's so complicated. When I was at WestJet, they thought they were the end all be all, right? They're like, oh, we don't do things like everybody else. And we're reservation system. What's the GDS? We don't want to use that. Like, let's just build our own stuff, right? So they spent $32 million over 4 years to try to build their own reservation system. They stopped, they wrote it off, and they got to Sabre. They realized how complex it is. And I used to be trained on loading fares in the GDS, and I would go against other fellows at Delta, and they'd be like, I was like, why'd you have 373 fares on this market? And they go, we can't take them out because it may just break. So they just keep adding stuff on top of it because they're worried. That's how complicated it is. So an online travel agency like Expedia, for example, if they had to have the most up-to-date fare for inventory, they would have to scrape the websites of all these airlines 330 days a year all the dates, all the markets. There's no way. I mean, computing power, you can probably get to it, but it would
Mhm.
cost them a lot of money to get all the pricing and cache it internally so that when you ask for something, it takes 1.9 seconds, not
Mhm.
14 seconds to give you a result. And that's what they want. They want speed. So they have to get all the information, they bring it in-house, and then they could give you what the price is. Now, that price that you see, maybe, I mean, it depends. If you go to Cheapo Air, it could be 10 hours old,
Yep.
right? It still shows at $99. And you're looking on the airline website, it's like it's $299. And they go, no, it's 99. What I would say that anybody who shops online on any OTAs, which would be like your Orbitz, your Expedia, your Cheapo Air, any of those. And that's the reason why when you click on it, and the website was like, oh, they're interested. Let me just go double check with the airline and see if it's still available. So then they ping the airline and then they get the availability and go, sorry, the price went up $200.
Yep.
That's why. It's not because they're monitoring your IP address. It's because that price was never available. It was too old. Okay, it had changed. Somebody had bought it. And so always get the client or yourself, if you look online, if you use Google Flight, get to the place where you have to put your name in, where the website will validate the actual price. That's when you know you're comparing apples to apples. Because before that, if you just shop from like the availability screen or the result screen, some of these fares can be totally outdated. And you spend the night on it, you talk to people about it, you quote it, they come back the next day, the price has gone up and they go, what happened? Right? So it was never there to start with. So that's something I would caution you if you do look online, especially if you use Google Flight. Click on the airline link, go to the website, make sure that when they get you to put your name in your credit card, that fare is still the same. And that's when you know that's up-to-date inventory.
Absolutely. Because airline inventory changes all the freaking time. A little insider, what I used to do was if I had to book 8 people, they're not big enough to be a group, or sometimes even if you had like 10 or 12, the group pricing was so much more than what individual pricing was. So I would see how many I could book at like 2 or 4 seats to get the lowest price. Then I would grab the next ones rather than just slapping 6 or 8 passengers in. I would only book a couple at a time. So the first few got a good price, then it went up a little bit. And I always positioned it as, look at this. I was able to save the group as a whole this amount rather than, well, why did that one get less? And it's all about positioning when you're dealing with air. And it's a matter of getting them, like your clients can't mess around. Once you get to the point of doing air is something that if you want this price, we do it now. And it's not something that's going to be there a week from now. It's not even going to be there an hour from now. And so getting your clients to take that action and really get going is so important. So,
And group pricing is a different beast altogether.
oh,
And I'll tell
heavens,
you a
yeah.
quick synopsis because from an airline standpoint, the group pricing, the advantage of a group pricing is not so much the fare you get. Most of the time you get a lower fare. But the benefit of a group fare is that you don't have to pay 100% of the ticket when you book it. You could put a deposit down. Your final payment is 60 days prior, 90 days prior, whatever the rule is. The names are only provided 30 days prior. You can change all the names up until 7 days prior. So it's the flexibility you get. Because once you book a ticket at the lower price, you put the name on it, you put 100%, it's non-refundable. You cannot change the name if little Johnny's sick and mom can't go on the cruise. So that's the advantage. So it's not, and if you think about it, an airline, if you think about it, if you understand the way it works, if you're going to book 60 seats on the plane 60 days out, they will charge you a premium because they know they're going to run out of seats come close to departure.
Yeah.
And that business person who wants to buy a $2,000 ticket, there's not going to be enough room for it.
Yeah.
It's a physical space. There's only 136 seats on every plane, let's say, right? So the more you take, it doesn't come cheaper. Like, because they can't produce, it's not like a retail product where you just manufacture more, the price goes down. It's the other way around. The more you take, the higher it goes. So you'd have to split on planes and different things, but the group is, the flexibility you get with the group is the main advantage. Lucky if you get a price lower than what you can buy publicly online, but that's the biggest advantage.
Well, and I think you're tapped into something there too, because normally when you go into retail and you're like, hey, so if I was to buy 75 sweatshirts, what can you do for me?
Mhm.
And they'll be like, "Oh, you're gonna take them? Okay, well then we can do a bulk order and therefore you're not gonna have to pay shit." Like, yeah, we could get you a better price because they only have to sell to one passenger, so that's great. In an airline world, it is different because I've heard people my favorite is, "I wait till last minute because then the plane's almost sold so they don't have to make money." And I'm like, "Oh, honey, that's called gravy season." When that plane is almost full, that is where they are making their money, and it comes down to, do you wanna go or not? Because they don't need your money anymore to pay for the flight. So this is their gravy, and they're not gonna give up their gravy. S
It goes even further than that. It's all psychology.
Mhm,
Like you never, most airlines will run, like no airline aims to run at 100% capacity. I
mhm,
mean, let's say if you have like, in Canada, we'll have Sunwing back in the day and Air Transat, which are more leisure focused. And usually there's a hotel room attached to a seat. So they're more likely going to get to 100%. But a regular scheduled airline can't even operate at 100% capacity. It's not even feasible. And that's why when you see numbers, good numbers are 82% seats sold, 84%. That's a really good month. And the airline would rather fly a seat empty than to give it to you for 99 bucks. Because if
mhm.
they do that, like they used to do, like that used to be the old way of doing it, right? Closer to, like, just fill those seats, let's give them the cheap
Right.
seats. But they have worked so hard in the last 10 years. If you remember how we used to cost anyone from going from cross country from Vancouver to Toronto, you could pay $300 round trip, right? Now they've accustomed, like we were accustomed to paying 800 and we think it's a sale. But
Yep.
that's taken 10 to 12 years to get the
Mhm.
client to know the understand the price in between these two cities. So if tomorrow they decide to give it to you for $99, guess what? Next time you're going to want a $99 again and you're going to wait for it.
Exactly. Yep.
So there's zero incentive. It's cheaper to fly the seat empty than to give it to you for $99, just
Yep.
on that premise alone.
Yep. Well, yeah, because if you've been in the industry this many years, like I remember back in the day, oh, heaven help me, Royal Decameron out of Alberta, 199 plus like $100 worth of taxes for 7 nights, all inclusive with the flights.
Where's that?
And
Down here in PV?
yeah, PV at Royal Decameron.
Oh yeah, I'm just
There's
down the
3 of
street.
them.
I live in
Yeah.
Sayulita.
Oh, perfect. But yeah, it used like when back when I started, it was like 199 bucks if you waited till the last minute. And
Yeah.
we used to sell that sucker like gangbusters. And
Yeah.
it drove me crazy because there was this whole culture of people who were like, no, we'll just wait till they're on fire sales.
Yeah.
Because at that point, Transat had Royal Decameron on risk, which meant they paid for the hotel room, whether somebody slept in it or not. So they
Mhm.
would blow it out, and it was so hard to sell. And so here's what I love when people are talking about price because they're like, it's so expensive now. And I actually, it's not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. It might appear that way. And we also have to have conversations with our clients. What are we comparing it to? What are we having those conversations about? Because like there's just so many layers to it that I actually don't find airfare that terribly much more expensive than it was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But we have people who still remember the 199 days from 15, 20 years
1984.
ago. Exactly. And that's what they're comparing it to. So don't be afraid to have that conversation of what are you comparing that to? What are
Yeah.
you thinking? Where are you thinking it should come in at? Because we want to get that layer of context to it as well. Well, I was told I saw this on an ad. Well, guess what? They're going to show you the very best that they could do that doesn't exist
Yeah.
because maybe two people got that price, but that's about it. Or it's on an airline that's gone bankrupt and we now know why
Mhm.
it went bankrupt type thing. So it's
Two of them.
looking at what those elements are. Where are they getting their context? Where are they getting their prices?
Yeah.
So air, it's not actually as scary as people think it is.
Mhm.
But there is a lot of questions. I think Andrea, she's like, I'm just going to echo what everybody else said. But she says, I spend a lot of time or waste a lot of time with flights. What would be your best tip for travel advisors who are like, I don't want to do air because it just takes too much time?
That's when you get into the game of trying to replicate the internet. You can't beat it. And most, if you think about it, if you go online, you go from here to here, this date, minimal information, enter, and you get a tremendous amount of information And then you have to sift through all the information to get to what you want.
Mhm.
Now, when somebody's paying you to do this work, you're like, listen, I'm a human. Like, just give me the context. Give me what needs to happen here. Like, we don't need to start with 10 pages of results, right? So the way we presented, we've developed a framework called the ideal itinerary framework. And essentially, we tell the clients, like, if you had a private jet, I'm the pilot. Tell me how the flight's going to go, regardless of frequency, regardless of day of week, regardless of if you think an airline flies there or not. Tell me how it goes. What time are you going to leave your house? What are you going to do before you leave your house? Do you have a meeting? Do you want to have dinner with your family? You want to put your kids to bed? Do you have a presentation first thing in the morning? Could you miss that meeting the next morning? Is it a cruise? You can't miss it. Obviously, if it's a cruise, could you be delayed an hour? What it is, how long are you going to stay? When can you be back at the airport? What happens before you get to the airport, right? And then you get that context. And chances are now you're looking for something very specific. And then you use all the filters on Google Flight, right? So you don't get 10 pages of results. You check the nonstop flight. You just narrow down from 50 hours to 18 hours to narrow the results. And then in that, you're going to find the ideal itinerary for the client. And let's say it's $1,500. And that's the anchor. That's where you start, right? The client told you what they want without money. You said, what you want costs this much money, $1,500. And then you could go, let me go see what's below that. Oh, here's a Porter flight and it's $500 cheaper. Here's why it flies to Hamilton, leaves of Abbotsford, whatever the case may be. There's only one flight a day. Then you highlight the pros and cons. And then you go above the line. You're like, oh, you know what? If you move up a cabin or if you take this way better airline, the difference is an extra $500. And this is what you're going to get if you pay an extra $500. And what you'll find is most people will be like, oh, I'm perfectly fine with the $1,500. That's exactly what I wanted. Because now you've provided the context for them. You've only sent them 3 options. And if they go with the lowest one, you've already explained what they're going to be missing out on. So they can't be mad if it does happen. So it's asking more questions. And your clients, like, I make my clients work all the time. I always reply to every one of their messages. There's no way I'm doing any work for one message. I'm always going to ask for clarity. Always. Yep. They know. They just don't understand. And that's part of our job is we always have to educate client how to work with us. It's no different in cruise. It's no different in whatever the niche you're in. You have to educate the clients what you need from them in order to make their experience. And you can't create an experience if you don't know what they want. And if they treat you like a website, you're going to have minimal information to go on. And that's when you're likely to waste a lot of time searching for flight. Pushback, example, everything's the same. Nonstop is $1,000. Connection is 500. Which one do you take?
Right.
Of course, a nonstop. Good. Keep going down that alley. Keep asking questions. What's your flexibility? If it was cheaper to fly the day before, would you do it? No, I can't. Okay. Then you just narrow down the scope before you even go and search for flights. And once you have a clear idea what you're searching for, it's really easy to find what the best itinerary is going to be for your client. And when you do that, then if you charge for it, you'd be like, oh my God, like, of course, I just gave them exactly what they want. So you always feel so much better when you charge for what you do, and you have an incentive to look for the right thing for them, right? Because ultimately for my clients, I want to have them for life. It's not a one-time thing. So, and because I charge fees, if I have to leave $1,000 commission on the table for taking the next airline because that's a much better deal for them, I will do it 100% of the time because I'll get that $1,000 somewhere else down the line. And that's the way I approach every client I work with. And I've had clients for 6, 7, 8 years now. And it's just a better place to be. It's a better place to communicate. It makes the relationship better when they know and by charging fees too, like they know now I'm working for them. Right. It's not ambiguous. They're like, I don't know how they make money. I'm assuming they take money somewhere, but I'm not really sure. Like I don't like to know how people are, if I don't know how people are compensated. Like, I don't think they will have my best interest at heart and make my money, maximize my spend if they're not charging me anything. And also to that point, like knowing your clients. I mean, we forget that most of our clients have businesses. First of all, most of your clients have bills. Most of your clients have subscriptions.
Right.
They get increases all the time. They pay for stuff everywhere. So it's not an uncommon thing to charge for something, first of all. And especially if you have a client that has a business or that works in a manager level and up, their business pay for stuff all the time. And I guarantee you it's way more money than you ever think they spend on anything, down to pens and papers and all that kind of stuff, right? So sometimes that's also the mindset when you get into doing work for, your ideal clients, is knowing, what they pay for in their life and what business they're in. And therefore charging fees is just, it's more of a hurdle for the person who asks for the money than for the person who has to give the money most of the time.
Yep. And that's a really important piece of it too, because I know for myself, when I fly to do keynote speaking or other such, I now only fly business class. That is part of the deal. If you want me to come speak at your conference or at your event, I fly business class. And I would say that was just in my business life, but I I, I, I like it. I flew the cheap seats to Phoenix in December, and I hadn't flown a cheap seat in a long time. And I have my seat pitch from my back to my knee is very long. And I had bruises for 3 days after my flight. And I'm like, we don't do this anymore. And so I was just booking my flight. I'm going back to Phoenix for another conference that I'm attending. Coming up here, I just booked my flight the other night, and I was like, well, I could do like an upgraded seat. Like I could pay for seat selection, so I have a little bit more room, because I was trying to justify the expenses. And I was like, screw it. We are booking the good seats, because by the time I started adding on, well, if I add this and I add that, I'm like, we're $200 or $300 difference. It's not that big of a deal. And then I'm like, oh, I'm getting in early. Well, let's add on early check-in. Oh, I'm leaving late. Let's add on late checkout. So suddenly my quote unquote, I'll go if I can do it on the cheap. We're no longer cheap. We are staying at a very nice hotel. We've added on we've added on post. We've added the best seats on the plane. And so suddenly I'm like, oh, yeah, but that's just how I go. And so when we are trying to keep our clients in these buckets, when we're trying to, well, I can get it cheaper. I promise you, most of your clients don't want the middle seat. They don't want to be where they can't have seat selection, or that they can't do it. They would rather not get nickeled and dimed every time they turn around, where they then have to pay for seats and pay for baggage and pay for all of these sorts of things. They would rather work with you just to have it as one price and to be able to do it. So I think sometimes we get too trapped by the pricing. And so I absolutely adore this anchor concept you have. I think that is the best way to position it, because it's that whole point of compromise, because we always say you've got to figure out, what is your point of compromise? What are you willing to give up on? And so here you've specifically anchored it, that this is what this costs. What are you like? I can give it to you for less. I could have sat the cheap seats. I could have saved some money, but I was like, no, I did that, and the bruises were there. So we're going to sit in the better seats. And having those sorts of conversations. My flight lands at 9:30 in the morning. Check-in was at 4. I'm like, for $50, psh, I get my room when I get there, And so there becomes these things that these aren't the decisions the travel advisor needs to make. These are the decisions your client deserves to be offered, so that they can make those decisions. And I think there's a lot of travel advisors that actually lose clients because the advisor's too focused on price. And so they are undercutting the potential experience that their clients could be getting. And in a lot of cases, I think that starts with the air. I think it starts with, like you were saying before we started recording, you put it beautifully where you said, this is how you bookend your trip. These are the bookends to the trip. And sometimes that piece in the middle, but this is really and truly, it's their first experience and it's their last experience. And those are the two most memorable parts of the trip for good or bad experiences. So if I was still a full-time travel advisor, I promise you, I would want to make sure that I was fully in the loop of what was happening with and or for my clients.
It's the same thing as if you meet fear with fear, it doesn't work. And if you've tried to fight pricing with pricing, also doesn't work. Like, I feel like my job is like, I'm like the experienced translator. I have that all the time. And trust me, I have some wealthy client and they still get caught into it all the time. But last time I made a really good framework for it. there's always like I call them like where they have the CEO hat on. That's the decision making hat, and that's money focus. There's no emotion. They can't even feel themselves in a seat. They're just pragmatic about the whole thing. My job is for them not to get 24 hours prior. And I check them in and I send them the boarding pass and they go, I'm in economy. Yeah, you decided that. And they go, well, how much would be for business now? I was like, dude, it's sold out. There's no opportunity. I know how they're going to feel when they get on the plane or they get into the traveler's mode.
Right.
So my job is to always try to get them to make a decision from that place. If I know my client is 6'3", and he insists on sitting on in any economy would be tight, right? But then if you fly Flair and if you fly Air Canada Rouge or if you fly, Spirit or Allegiant, I know this guy's going to be sitting sideways the whole time. I was like, that's going to be a terrible experience. But he doesn't know it until he gets on the plane. And sometimes just preventing that is worth gold because they go, oh, I didn't think about that. And I go, you're right. And then they remember, oh, I remember last time I flew. They totally forgot because people get so blinded by the price. I had a client that wanted to fly like an extra connection, 2 stops to Denver coming from Peru, Lima. We do this route all the time to save $1,000. It may seem like a lot, but it's not really a lot when you talk about $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 tickets and knowing his financial position. And of course, they get caught in Denver. There's a snowstorm, cancel overnight and everything. And then I send him a message because I remember a conversation we had 2 months ago. And I simply said, was it worth the savings? And he answers, haha, no. And I said, should I remind you next time? And he goes, yes, please. So I screenshotted that. Now I have that every time we look at booking a flight. He forgot the very next flight that has happened.
Yeah.
So people need to reminded way more than they need to be taught anything, or like they're almost like children at a certain point. So it's the pricing thing, like it blinds everybody. And I think the best thing you could do is try to translate the experience for the client, what it's going to be like if they do this, if they fly a reputable airline like Delta, for example, flying overseas with Iceland Air with a stop in Reykjavik, let's say, right? This is how the experience is going to be. If you get stuck, you know what? Delta, we could put you on KLM, we could put you on Air France, easy. If you're stuck on Iceland Air, I mean, you may be stuck 12 hours until the next flight comes in, and the delays are a bit longer. And so it's just putting the skin around it. Most of you guys know the stuff. If you had a client that sent you an itinerary to go on a cruise, I guarantee you would look at it and you would find something to make you go, oh, like 40-minute connection? What? No, don't do that. Intuitively, everybody knows that, but the client won't know because he just sees the price.
Yeah.
And then you'll be like, listen, I don't think connecting in Denver in January is a good idea. I think we should take a connection to Houston, perhaps, right? Just be safe.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know that. And do you think that's the good idea to land at 10 o'clock at night when it's the very last flight to get into Fort Lauderdale when your boat's leaving the next morning? Even a red eye won't get you there on time. Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. So maybe we take so if somebody sends you an itinerary, it doesn't matter your level. You are going to find something. And even if that's the first role you play in starting to help your clients with flying, is just send me what you're about to book. Find something, I'll vet it for you and I'll tell you the pros and cons of it. Everybody can do that super easily. And again, they're very simple things that you can pick up on, right? Oh, you're booking a basic fare. Oh, I didn't see that. Did you know you don't have any luggage? You can't change it. It's non-changeable entirely. Oh, I totally forgot. Like, you can save people so much headache by just anticipating certain things. And it's a lot of information that most of you know. And because I'm talking about it now, some of you are probably like, oh, yeah, of course I know that. Of course I know that. Oh, I didn't think that was important. But that's the point, is it's all very simple. They're all little things. But if you stack enough little things on top of each other, it becomes tremendous value from a client.
Yeah. There's a reason why when clients DIY it, they end up in Sydney, Canada versus Sydney, Australia, or that with but I had 2 hours to connect. But when your 2 hours to connect is because you flew into LaGuardia and you're leaving from JFK, it's
And
suddenly
they didn't
not enough
notice.
time. There's a lot of things that can come up. And so I know that one of the questions was about liability and other such, but I think the best thing you can do for your client is to service them from beginning to end. If you don't want to touch air because it's too complicated, then what is the client actually working with you for? Because if you don't want to touch the complicated stuff, why should they pay you for the easy stuff? That's always kind of my biggest question. And then obviously, if you have questions about what the rules are in terms of airlines or simply booking air and other such, reach out to your host agency, reach out
Mhm.
to ASTA or ACTA. They all have all sorts of resources wherever you are in the world. There is going to be governing bodies that are going to help give you the legislations and information that you need to know. Again, ASTA is a great resource in the US, ACTA in Canada, and always reach out to your host agency or to your consortia to see what they have to say. Larry, thank you. This was phenomenal. Obviously, we could keep going for days, I'm
Oh,
sure.
I could do another few hours.
Fantastic. So, if the travel advisors want to know more about air, want to know more about this, how can they connect? How can they find you? How can they ask?
We have a community that's called AirLab, and we host it on a platform called School, SKOOL. And yeah, we've got over 100 advisors now in there, and that's where we talk about air and everything else connected to air, because everything is. So a lot of mindset stuff and how to build businesses and stuff. So that's the playground. That's where we have fun and talk about the stuff like that. That seems complicated, but once you hash it out, you find that other people have the same issues as you, and it's not as complicated as you think it is. So
Yeah. And you know what? Air is just like anything else in the industry. The first few times you do it, it's scary AF. But
mhm.
once you get going, you like down the road, you'll look back to when you were like, oh, it's too complicated. It's too this. And then afterwards, you'll be like, "Pfft, I can do air in my sleep. I don't know why that was complicated. Yes,
Yep.
hiccups can happen, but hiccups can happen with everything. There is low water levels. There is hotels that have a fire alarm or have a fire. Like there's so many things that can happen in so many places in travel that just dive in. And air really isn't that scary.
If I could just put it into context, like I had a presentation I had to prepare not so long ago, and I looked into our stats and remember we only do air, and we have a cancellation once every 133 flights. For
Wow.
some of you, it's going to take years to book 133 flights.
Yeah.
That's our rate. And I think
Yeah.
it's high because I have data from 2021, which is still a very high cancel year post COVID. And because that's 0.75% of our flights, and it should be about zero point 0.4.
Yeah.
Like 0.4% of flight get canceled. So
Yeah.
don't get caught into it. It can happen,
Yeah.
but it's likely if it happens in Toronto because there's a snowstorm, if you don't have anybody flying to Toronto, guess what? You have no cancellation to deal with.
Yeah.
So, but that's contributes to the fear. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't happen as often as you think it does. So most of the
And
time things are A to B,
right.
smooth, no problems happens.
And generally speaking, a lot of it gets blown out of proportion because the news has slow news cycles. They haven't been
Mhm.
so slow lately, so I haven't heard about the lineups at airports and other such in the last while. I may also be on a little bit of a news detox where I don't watch it as often. But the reality is it is it's these things that show up. It's the clickbait and other such that your clients are seeing. Just calm them, reassure them, because here's the deal. If you can't get them on the plane, you're not getting them on the river cruise, you're not getting them on the safari, you're not getting them to all of these other amazing experiences. So, a lot of times when travel advisors come to me and they say, but I'm getting objections, I'm getting ghosted, I'm getting all of these things. When we drill it down, a lot of times it's because you didn't reassure them at the air level. So, getting them on board with that, letting them know that it's not that scary, that you fly on the ongoing. Because I'm not going to lie, right now, like I said, I just booked a flight to Arizona and I'm like, is it actually safe to fly in the US right now? Because there's a lot of stuff going on. And so there's the irrational part of my brain that thinks that, but then there's also the rational part of my brain that goes, look at how many times it doesn't happen. That there's nothing that goes awry. And
Yep.
so if I don't book that flight and if I don't get on it, I don't get to have any of the experiences that I'm going to have once I'm there. So it's
Exactly.
a matter of reassuring your clients, getting them going, and just letting them experience it. So this has been absolutely fantastic. I have lots of notes. We're going to link all this up in the show notes so that you can find Lary afterwards. We'll link up his school on there for you, the Air Lab, so that you guys can check it out. And until next time, happy selling.
Thanks, everyone.